Hello, and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, November 20th, and we've got a lot to discuss today on the podcast. It is episode 431 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me, whether on YouTube or any of the different audio podcast platforms. Today, we're joined by Jake Asman. Jake, thanks so much for coming back on. How's it going, man?
Hey, Bubs, I'm doing okay. I'm doing
Yeah.
about as well as a Jet fan could do during these dark times.
Yeah, 100%. It's been a another one of these same old Jets type of seasons. 3-8 going into the bye week. Coach fired earlier in the year. Now you fire the general manager, completely blow it up, and we're heading towards another rebuild here. I wanted to get your thoughts first of all, just on the Joe Douglas firing, because that is, of course, the hottest news. We'll get into the Woody Johnson report from the Athletic and all that stuff, but just what was your initial reaction so far on Douglas being fired? Of course, 30-64, no playoff appearances. Makes a lot of sense, did some good things, but ultimately no playoffs in 6 years is going to get you canned. What was your reaction to that news?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? For all the good moves he made, and clearly he made some good moves. That's how, despite the record, even coming into this year, he was still the GM coming
Yep.
into this year, right? But ultimately, he missed on too many big things that impact that record. Coach, quarterback, left tackle, you can go down the line. And for me, what really hurt Joe Douglas is that I believe he made the same critical mistake for the second year in a row. Last year, he neglected the backup quarterback position after Aaron Rodgers went down. And you could say going into the year, oh, if Zach only had to play a game or two, fine, he could be the backup. But you knew after 4 plays, Aaron Rodgers' season was over. That team last year, which is clearly better than this year's team somehow, was a quarterback away from at least being a playoff team. Average quarterback play, even slightly below average quarterback play, might have been enough to win a few more games and crack the playoffs and end this drought. And he did nothing. And then you fast forward to this year, Bubs, and Greg Zuerlein, look, he was awesome the last 2 years, but when you lose it as a kicker, you lose it. It was clear he wasn't the guy, and they waited so long to finally do something. It was too little too late. So for the second year in a row, his inaction led to the season essentially being derailed. So I'm not surprised he's gone. It would have been tough to justify keeping him and let him hire another coach, let him maybe draft another quarterback. You couldn't do it with the record. The most amount of games they ever won during his time here was 7, 3 different times. It just wasn't good enough. And while he did some good things, ultimately the things he missed on did him in.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not even like he delivered us a 9-win season, not even sniffed the playoffs. The closest they got, of course, was that 2022 campaign where they lose 6 straight to end the year, get blown out in that Seattle game. And yeah, while he did some good, the Jets are the only team from that 2022 draft class, top 5, to not win a playoff game since that point. And even like you mentioned, obviously they started with Becton. I think it was only fitting, right? His first pick as a general manager was Mekhi Becton. His last first round pick was Olu Fashanu. So it kind of shows you in that 5-year, 6-year window, could never find the left tackle. That turned into Dwayne Brown, turned into Tyron Smith. And even for some of the hits, like even though you had Breece Hall, you also had Michael Carter and Michael Pirine. Even though you had Garrett Wilson, Denzel Mims, and Elijah Moore were in there as well. So there was some good, but a lot of bad free agency, a lot of misses there. And I guess too, to kind of shift into the whole Woody Johnson report now, like this is another one of these bombshell reports from the Athletic. Of course, we got another one after this past season in 2023 with the whole Robert Saleh stuff. How much of the report do you believe? I guess what was the most important parts of the report for you that you took away, and what is just a complete dumpster fire right now, which
Yeah.
starts at the ownership.
Some of it I find a little hard to believe. Like
Mm-hmm.
Woody Johnson randomly wanted Tony Adams
Yeah,
bench. Like it's just weird, right? Like some of it you just laugh at and go, "What?" Like,
yeah,
but my big thing is it tries to point the blame at Woody for this team being bad, but the reality is Woody wasn't meddling, to my knowledge, really before this year, right? Like Joe Douglas had full autonomy for 5 years before this season. So, look, at the end of the day, Woody Johnson getting involved proved to be the wrong thing, but I also feel a little hypocritical completely trashing him because some of the moves he made were the moves every Jet fan wanted this team to make. And ultimately, you hope that when they bring in the new GM and new coach, part of the selling point is, hey, we're patient. We're going to give you time because that's the one thing they had been until this year. They never fired a coach in season in 25 years they've owned the team. And Joe Douglas got 5 years basically uninterrupted. He got to pick his coach. He got to draft his quarterback. Then he got to try and make up for that mistake and trade for Aaron Rodgers to rectify the situation. I mean, he had 5 drafts, 5 free agent periods. So I know it's easy to blame Woody, and he's a bad owner until proven otherwise. But, he's not selling the team. So you just have to hope that they hire the right people. And, like, that to me is what it's all about. And my big thing now moving forward is, okay, we know they need a new GM. We know they need a new head coach. What's the process to find those guys? Who's helping them? Like, who's in the interviews? Are they going to hire a consultant? Are they going to hire some football people? Like Curtis Martin's name was mentioned. Like, are they going to bring in someone that has had success or knows what winning is supposed to look like and identify good candidates? Because, it's tough if you're a Jet fan to trust this ownership group to pick the right people to run the team because they've been so bad at it for a long time.
Yeah, 100%. And I kind of want to add on to what you just had to say there. Obviously, Curtis Martin was a name brought up a couple days ago. Pete Carroll could be another name. You saw the Commanders ask for help, and now look at where they are at right now. What are some names that you would potentially like? I mean, they can't go out and hire Corn and Ferry again, just some random agency, and expect this thing to work. It's got to be football people making football decisions. What are some names that you potentially like to come in here, help this team as a consultant, hire the GM, put the right head coach in place, and really build this culture back up again?
What I would like to see is them to maybe bring in Pete Carroll as like a director of football, like someone like that who has experience if he's interested in the role. Like, that to me is where it starts. If you can't get him, honestly, I'd consider Pete to be the head coach just to try and like write the culture, and maybe he could put together a staff where there's an heir apparent down the line. But more importantly, like, to me, they need to hire people that have had their previous jobs before. I texted with a longtime front office executive yesterday and was just asking about the Jet job. And he basically told me, they need to hire someone with experience. Like, that's not a job for first timers. I feel that way about GM. I feel that way about coach. Like, if you told me the Jets came away with, John Dorsey as the general manager and like Brian Flores as the head coach, 2 realistic names, in my opinion, that to me would make a lot of sense. So I just want guys with experience. Like, my number 1 head coaching target's Mike Vrabel. I don't know if he'd take this job, but I'm going to at least try. Brian Flores interests me, right? He's coached in the division. He had success in Miami. It wasn't his fault necessarily why he got fired there. And he's a Brooklyn guy too. So he understands the market, understands the area. I think John Gruden's a guy you talk to if you're trying to change the culture. He has experience. He's an offensive guy. He brings a personality. I think you need someone that can handle the media, can handle the fan scrutiny, and can handle ownership and push back on ownership and say, hey, don't meddle because I know what I'm doing here. I feel like ownership gets involved when they lose faith in the guy they hire. But if the guys you hired are proven to be good at their job beforehand, they could push back. So I just think guys with experience, Bubs, is so important.
Yeah, 100%. You need guys that, football people making football decisions. You can't go back down I know Ben Johnson's a hot name. You can't go back down the first-time coordinator route because they just get eaten alive here, which you started to see, of course, with Douglas and Saleh. Now, this has been a question that's been kind of hot around the Jets, and every team, I guess, could have the same question against them as well. But how appealing do you feel this Jets job is, right? The report coming out from The Athletic doesn't make it look good at all with a meddling owner and Woody Johnson, but they've got some pieces in place. Like I said, Douglas didn't do everything all bad, so they do have some blue chip cornerstone pieces on offense, couple pieces on defense as well. From a roster perspective, it's a lot better than what Douglas took over. But from an ownership perspective, how much power they'll have, how appealing do you feel this job is to try and retool and get this team back on track after 14 years?
I don't know if it's the most attractive job, but I also don't think it's the most unattractive job. And people are going to say, what, Woody, this, that. But like, once again, go look at the history of Woody. He lets you do your job. You got a long leash. Like, Todd Bowles got 4 years. Mike McCagnon got 5. Yep. Rex Ryan got 6. Adam Gase never should have been hired, and they never fired him. He got 2 full years. You look at the Johnsons in their tenure as owners, they typically spend money, and then they defer to their football people for a lot of it. So while it's not perfect, you are right about the roster having talent. Now, what's the plan at quarterback? And I think that's where the Aaron Rodgers question comes into place here. I think no matter what they might want to do with Aaron Rodgers, you need to tell a GM/coach, it's up for you guys to decide what the plan is there, because you can't tell a GM or coach, hey, you got to have Rodgers for a year no matter what because we're trying to sell tickets, or, we love him and we want him here for another year. Like that can't be the thing that happens. So if you want the job to be more attractive, you got to be willing to give full autonomy to the people you're bringing in. And if that means cutting Rodgers and taking the dead cap hit all next year or spreading it out over 2, then you got to do it, because you can't justify keeping Rodgers and then telling the new GM, new coach, you're stuck with the guy for a year. Some coaches might like that. And from the standpoint of, if Aaron looks okay here down the stretch, hey, maybe you get a year of Aaron, try and win. You could draft the quarterback. That guy could sit, and then he's being groomed to take over the following year. Maybe you could sell it from that standpoint, but I'm not so sure given how Aaron's played these last 2 games. It's why I think, well, it feels like he's not coming back. So much could happen over the next 6 games here. So, but I think that's the biggest thing. Whoever you bring in, you got to say you're running the show. You got full power. We're not stepping in, and then it becomes a more of attractive job.
Yeah, and you just talked about Rodgers there. Do you feel your gut tells you he's back here in 2025? Do they move on? What do you feel is the ultimate decision there? Obviously, if Rodgers is coming back, maybe that means that McCarthy's coming in, 41 years old, not going to want to learn a new system. How do you view Rodgers' future with this getting blown up?
My gut is he's not here. I'm more open, I think, than some Jet fans to like, hey, maybe he's back. But when you just look at the contract, right? The longer you hold on to him, the bigger the dead cap hit is down the line. Now, originally, you don't care about that because you thought you'd have him for this year, and next year you still were trying to win, or maybe you had a deep playoff run this year, and like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. It's $23 million of a cap hit next year. But, I read something where if you decide to move on after this year, it's a $49 million dead cap that you could either take up front next year in 2025, or it's $15 million in 25 and it's $35 million in 2026. If you keep them for 2025, it then becomes a $63 million dead cap that you could either take in 2026 or you could spread out over 2026 and 2027. Point being, Aaron hasn't played well enough to justify impacting your dead cap that drastically in 26 and 27. So I feel like it didn't work. You tried it. It might just be best for all sides to move on. But, I really want it to work. So if he goes out there and plays great down the stretch and they win some games, well, then maybe there's a chance new coach will come in. You convince Aaron to play with a new modern offense and you got a chance. But as I'm talking this out, saying these scenarios to you, it just feels extremely unlikely given how piss poor this football team has played for most of this year.
Yeah, 100%. As we start to close things out here, just curious, and I know we talked about head coach, general manager. Right now, if you had to make a prediction, who do you feel is leading the way? GM, head coach, football operations, potentially as well. What is your feeling where this team goes in terms of Vrabel, Dorsey, whoever that might be?
It's a great question. I really don't know what they're going to do at GM. That's the thing. Like I hope they could look at a guy like John Dorsey. If they can't get him, if they're going to try the first time GM, Ray Agnew, who's the assistant GM of the Lions. His son's currently a scout with the Jets. Maybe that's appealing to him. It's so tricky with GM because you just don't know some of the names. With coach, I really just hope they hire someone with experience. If you tell me they got Vrabel or Flores, or if the Browns were to fire Kevin Stefanski, he'd be my number one guy. I just think I'm tired. Look, I get it. We want the offensive guy. Get me Ben Johnson if you can get him. I doubt that's happening. So if you can't get the top guy, bring in someone that's done it before. So you're not bringing in someone that's trying to learn on the job. And please, for the love of God, don't hire a first-time coach that has a defensive background. And I really like Aaron Glenn. In a different universe, it would make sense to hire him. I just don't know if the Jets could roll the dice right now, given that they tried it with Saleh. They tried it with Bowles. They tried it with Rex, Mangini, Herm. Like, hire an offensive coach or hire a coach with previous experience. And that brings me back to the 3 names I talked about before: Vrabel, Stefanski, Flores, even John Gruden, right? I think those are the guys you want to talk to.
Yeah, and they need to find their Vrabel could potentially be that. Gruden could potentially be that. They need to find their newer modern day Parcells, where Parcells came in here, cleaned up the code type mess, and set this organization up for really 2010. This team, was making the playoffs consistently, had a couple playoff runs under Herm, of course, the back-to-back AFC title games with Rex. And if Favre doesn't go down or doesn't play with the hurt shoulder, they're probably making it again with Mangini. They need that type now, where you go through this long drought, you're coming off of another coach and general manager miss. You need a guy that's going to set up the culture not only just over the next couple seasons, but long-term, 5+ years from now. Now, as we start to close things out, where can everybody find all your stuff? Twitter, YouTube, and where can everybody see where you're at?
Yeah, Jake Asman on all social, and YouTube, The Jake Asman Show, talking daily about the state of the Jets, which It's not great, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah, the state is the same old Jets. That's what it feels like.
This is
Never.
actually worse, by the way. I will
Yeah,
say,
it is.
same old Jets would have teased us, won a couple games down
Yeah,
the stretch, and then had a backbreaking loss, and we lament all the brutal games they blew at the beginning of the year. This team is just so bad. Same old Jets, they would have gave us a little more than this. Now they're just we're just going to be the biggest joke ever. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, if they find new ways to lose every single week. It feels like every single week we've hit a new rock bottom. Felt like New England was rock bottom, then Arizona was rock bottom. Now this is rock bottom. Feels like it can't get any lower now with the general manager and the coach out, but who knows? This team never ceases to amaze us. So that'll do it. Appreciate you all tuning in. Jake, thanks so much for coming on. We'll have a lot more content coming your way the rest of this week. Thankfully, it is a bye week, so we don't have to watch this crappy team on Sunday. But that'll do it. As always, through the highs and lows, JETS, Jets. Talk to you guys soon.